Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Tourism and Hospitality Service Management, SOTHSM, Master's Degree, Master of Tourism Travel Management, MTTM, Semester 3, MTTM-10 Tourism Impacts, Unit-1 Sustainable Development, Tourism Debate 1.0 Objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to times understand the concept of sustainable development, times know about some of the major developmental approaches, times link the above mentioned objectives with tourism development, and times appreciate the role to be played by different segments of the tourism system for sustainable tourism development. 1.1 Introduction. In 1999, as per the WTO, international tourist arrivals touched the 664 million figure. Out of this, 62.1% market share went to 15 countries. In terms of international tourism receipts of $455 billion, 15 countries had shared $286.7 billion, with US having the largest share of $74.4 billion. Well, these figures are not just numbers, as they demonstrate a variety of things. Massive movements of people also mean utilization and consumption of resources, both man-made and natural, and leaving behind impacts, socio-cultural, environmental, economic, etc. If you add to this the numbers of domestic tourists, virtually ignored in such analysis, the resources consumed and the impacts would be mind-boggling. The impacts are both positive as well as negative. Whereas the developed and rich nations have the resources to mitigate the negative impacts, the poor and developing nations continue to suffer in this regard. However, in both the cases, application of the concept of sustainable development is the talk of the day. Hence, the development debate has been consciously selected as the first theme of this course. The unit starts with describing the concept of sustainable development and goes on to explain some developmental approaches. Of course, the emphasis is on the tourism development. Why should the industry support the efforts for sustainable tourism development, and what should be the role of consumers, tourists, and service providers, hosts, are the other questions which the unit attempts to answer. In brief, the unit also discusses the views of WTO on the issue of sustainability in tourism development. It is expected that the knowledge provided in this unit would be put into actual practice by our learners. 1.2 Sustainable development, the two alternative paths for development, i.e., you live in harmony with nature or you exploit nature, have always been available to the human beings. Different societies, at different intervals, have adopted either of the two paths. Some, on the other hand, adopted a middle path. There are village societies where, while consuming the natural resources, precautions were taken that the future generations should not be adversely affected. Decision-making in such societies was done keeping in view the interests of future generations and not just of the present ones. Hence, what in modern terminology is described as sustainable may not be a new concept for many students of history. With over 300 definitions of sustainable development and every one claiming to be a green, it is not an easy task to define sustainability in the developmental context. However, the awareness and growth of nature conservation, concern for environmental degradation, etc. have all contributed to the emergence of this concept in its modern sense. The most widely accepted definition is the one given by Brundtland Commission in 1987, which defined sustainable development as a process of change in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technology development, and institutional changes are made consistent with future as well as present needs, and as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In 1983, the UN established the World Commission on Environment and Development, which was chaired by the Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland. The report of this commission, 1987, is famous as Brundtland Report. Sustainability is an integrative concept because it looks at the human use and management of resources in a manner that should not destroy or disturb the habitat that is the basis of survival. Socioeconomic and environmental dimensions thus become the focus of the management approach. Changes in the views of the community and its attitudes towards development are relegated to a secondary position. For the first time, an effort was made at the international level in 1990 during the Globe 90 conference, Vancouver, Canada, to link tourism and travel with sustainable development. The Tourism Stream Action Strategy Commission of the conference prepared an action strategy for sustainable development. Further, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development came with the famous Rio Declaration, June 1992. Some of the highlights of this declaration are: times in order to achieve sustainable development, environmental protection should constitute an integral part of the development process and cannot be considered in isolation from it. Principle 4. Times all states and all people shall cooperate in the essential task of eradicating poverty as an indispensable requirement for sustainable development, in order to decrease the disparities in standards of living and better meet the needs of the majority of the people of the world. Principle 5. Times the right to development must be fulfilled so as to equitably meet developmental and environmental needs of present and future organizations. Principle 3. Etc. For details of Rio Declaration, see www.anep.org/documents.asp? Document ID is equal to 78, article ID is equal to 1163, and the annexure to this Unit 1.3 Sustainable Tourism and Development. The concept of sustainability has become a fundamental issue in tourism development and growth after the debate at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. Seeing the rapid changes in tourism and the world trends, we are now examining geopolitical, socio-economic, technological, and environmental impacts of contemporary tourism. It was realized that tourism requires an agenda of its own and not as a part of the overall post-structural adjustment process. This was reflected in the 7th meeting of the Commission on Sustainable Development in 1999. Which was devoted to tourism impacts around the world. This was due, to a large extent, to the efforts of NGOs working in different parts of the world coming together to speak in one voice on what their experience had been through grassroots interaction in the course of the phenomenal growth of tourism in the last 2 decades. It, therefore, became a part of the evaluation of the implementation of the Agenda 21 set at Rio. The concept of sustainability when applied to tourism can be perceived and interpreted in various ways. Sustainability for attractions, both natural and man-made, infrastructure, cultures, environment, economy, etc. will have different meaning for different disciplines, and the methodologies adopted also may not be the same. For example, a sociologist might be interested in retaining the authenticity of customs, rituals, or other aspects of culture that are now being packaged as tourism products or attractions. In this case, sustainability can be achieved by retaining the authenticity, and hence, both the concepts are interlinked. Similarly, in the case of natural resources, water, forests, hills, etc., it would be linked to consumption patterns and levels. In case of historical buildings and monuments, it would be linked to conservation aspects. For a destination, it would mean sustaining its attraction, and so on. And yet we can derive some commonality on the issue. According to Victor T.C. Middleton and Rebecca Hawkins, Sustainable Tourism, A Marketing Perspective, Oxford, 1998, sustainable tourism means achieving a particular combination of numbers and types of visitors the cumulative effect of whose activities at a given destination, together with the actions of the servicing businesses, can continue into the foreseeable future without damaging the quality of the environment on which the activities are based. The scope of environment in this definition is quite large, and according to them, practical environmental policies in travel and tourism, 1994, for all practical decisions as far as tourism is concerned, environment means the quality of natural resources such as landscape, air, sea water, fresh water, flora and fauna, and the quality of built and cultural resources judged to have intrinsic value and be worthy of conservation. Achieving sustainability for tourism, according to them, requires that the cumulative volume of visitor usage of a destination and the associated activities and impacts of servicing businesses should be managed below the threshold level at which the regenerative resources available locally become incapable of maintain, the environment. Here, we must also take note of Richard Buller's view, 1994, which differentiates between sustainable tourism and sustainable development in the context of tourism. Sustainable tourism, according to him, is tourism in a form that can maintain its viability in an area for an indefinite period of time, whereas sustainable development in the context of tourism is tourism that is developed and maintained in an area in such a manner and at such a scale that it remains viable over an indefinite period and does not degrade or alter the environment in which it exists to such a degree that it prohibits the successful development and well-being of other activities and processes. We can say that for sustainable tourism development, environment conservation and management of visitor usage and servicing businesses are interlinked concepts. They are susceptible to the impacts of times tourist host behavior and attitudes, times the policies of the servicing businesses, times the government policies, and times the changes in technology. None of the above four can be described as static, and hence, the management of sustainable tourism is also a dynamic activity. When we apply the sustainability criteria to the way in which the tourism industry operates and the way tourism products are consumed by the tourists, international as well as domestic, our attention is immediately drawn to the tourism impacts on the destinations, times natural resources and attractions, including man-made, times economy, times society, and times culture, etc. Tourism is also an economic activity like any other sector. Although it has a glamorized image, it involves international forces that work according to global laws. This means that the development debate has to come to terms with the sustainability of international tourism. Despite its complexities, tourism has a variety of products to offer, from low-impact products to high-impact products. These can be delivered by the organized sector, but in small and developing countries, the unorganized sector plays an important role in delivering these products. The tourism product has several components which are supplied by a variety of suppliers, all of whom do not have common standards. Tourism represents a variety of interests. At the destination are the local people who are divided by the costs and benefits of tourism. Then there is the industry, where the organized and unorganized sectors can have differences and the national and multinational companies can have a conflict of interests. Governments tend to promote tourism for economic reasons without looking at the impacts and costs. Then there are the tourists who have different patterns of consumption and expect different levels of service. For the developmental debate, therefore, we have to engage in a multi-stakeholder process to see how to resolve genuine conflicts and respect the aspirations of the stakeholders who are involved in this activity. The challenge before a country like India, which has always looked at tourism as a source of earning foreign exchange, even though we have not had a foreign exchange crisis for a decade, is how to be a part of the global market for new tourist destinations at a time when a new consumer is emerging, such consumers are concerned with the issue of sustainability even as they consume more than their share of tourism resources in the far corners of the world. In fact, there is a range of issues that the concept of sustainable tourism has raised in the contemporary tourism development debate. These include 1. Contemporary tourism involves movement of 640 million people across boundaries and many millions within the boundaries, figures that could not be imagined 50 years ago. How can we deliver a sustainable product, particularly where ecosystems are fragile and yet an attraction for the tourist gaze? 2. How to evaluate, keeping in view the sustainability criteria, the conflicts and convergence between development and tourism. This evaluation has to be done keeping in view the development of socio-economic and environmental resources for increasing the wealth and well-being of the people. 3. Particular pressures of tourism on specific resources have to be evaluated. 4. The need to accommodate the present rates of growth vis-à-vis consumption and production is a challenge to the concept of sustainable tourism. 5. There is a need for policy initiatives that would help to promote an awareness of the fact that contemporary tourism impacts go beyond the beneficial aspects and can also be very damaging as growth and profitability are pursued. This requires new terms of legitimatizing the importance given to tourism. Income generation and employment can no longer be the sole determinants in this regard. Tourism is not an undifferentiated phenomenon. There are as many types of tourism as there are market segments. Niche tourism, niche markets. There is a need for establishing a balance between tourism and other existing and potential activities. Again, merely endorsing sustainable tourism whilst continuing with mass tourism will make the costs and profits of such tourism growth disappear in the long run. There is uncertainty, but it also puts a challenge before us. If tourism responds to societal changes and global changes, whilst conforming to the basic principles of conservation of our planet's resources, then there can be opportunities for tourism enterprises based on the new ethics. Here again, traditional societies like India have an advantage since they have not yet opened up to the neoliberal market rationality of overconsumption. They still recycle, reuse and renew their resources since the integration with the money and market global economy is not complete. What happens later is yet to be seen, but late starters have an advantage of utilizing others' experiences. As globalization and the World Trade Organization demolish protective barriers, we have to renew our commitments to 1. The conservation and enhancement of ecological processes and set our priorities so that in the New World Order we may not be subject to non-tariff barriers. 2. Protection of our biodiversity, as the extinction of any species is the first alarm call for human survival as well. 3. Inter- and intragenerational equity, which involves the rights of the child, youth, the elderly, the poor and women, and particularly indigenous communities whose survival is so closely tied with the survival of our biodiversity. 4. Integration of economic, social, political, cultural and environmental concerns, which will help to bring about a holistic model of tourism that represents our ethics and culture. As environmental and economic issues are becoming more interdependent, tourism policy makers and facilitators have to ensure that the new model of sustainability becomes an opportunity for target groups and communities and not a threat to their survival. Just as the worst impacts of tourism have been documented, so also the best practices have been documented. However, these should be used to get a commitment for sustainability, not only as a political slogan but also as an analytical tool. 1.4 Approaches. Development means different things to different people. It is a combination of differing values, both material and ethical. It covers the present and the future, but uses the past to show the way, to compare and to evaluate the nature of social change that includes economic and technological changes as well. as the cultural and geopolitical context of change. Consequently, there has not only been a debate on the nature and structure of development, but approaches have been suggested on how to measure tourism and its impacts, and also to create perspectives that express the evolution of balance, development, and growth. To make the debate accessible to a wider and concerned group, four broad approaches to development can be identified. These are modernization, dependency, neoclassical and neoliberal counter-revolution, and alternative development. 1. Modernization theories see societies passing through a series of stages from lower to higher levels of development. The highest level is where the role of innovation and entrepreneurship is of great importance, as the developed areas of the world have demonstrated. State involvement to ensure a trickle-down effect is a part of this model. In tourism, enclaves and large resorts and state investments in such projects in partnership with the private sector have been encouraged in all developing countries. In India, the state-owned Ashok Group of Western-style hotels in metros, urban areas and even remote destinations was a part of the modernization model. 2. Dependency theory links development to external forces, where power at the center exploits the periphery. An example is the colonial exploitation of India, where British interests determined the path of development undertaken in India. International tourism, being concentrated in the West, uses developing countries as cheap destinations for budget tourists, which perpetuates the dualism between the rich and the poor. The response to this concentration of wealth and power is to favor domestic markets, be self-sufficient and substitute domestic tourism for international tourism to have control of the expenditure and benefits. In India, domestic tourism is of the volume of 170 million and contributes 3 times the earnings of international tourism. Domestic tourism is only now being recognized as the basis of tourism development rather than international tourism. 3. Neoliberal or neoclassical responses to the oil crisis and the debt crisis of the 70s and 80s have stressed the role of privatization and the free market as a solution. Development through incentives, subsidies, and other financial inducements to foreign investors has been propagated for developing countries to reach the same level in tourism activity as Europe and North America have achieved in the post-war period. The World Bank has been a major proponent of this approach, along with other non-governmental international organizations like the UNDP and the ADB, which have funded major tourism programs in developing countries. The scale of these projects often defeat the local aspirations and conditions. This led to the emergence of the movement of local NGOs who evaluated the impacts of such developments. Their conclusions were that such forms of tourism did not help the disadvantaged who were the most in need of economic activity that would help to remove their poverty. 4. Alternative development approaches are based on basic needs satisfaction. Has the resort development at Kovalam or Goa resolved the issue of food, clothing, housing, health and education needs of the local people? This approach provides a grassroots perspective, where LOCL, needs and people's control are the major planning inputs. Ecotourism, nature tourism, appropriate tourism, ethical tourism and responsible tourism are some of the concepts that have emerged from this approach. These concepts often overlap and are not very precise. Critics argue that tourism is big business and the grassroots approach may not bring the benefits desired. The gender perspective, which looks at the issue of women in tourism and opposes the promotion of child abuse and sex tourism, has also been a contentious area between proponents of alternative tourism and mainstream tourism. As these ideas indicate, the tourism development debate is also a political and ideological debate. Conservative politics favors open market with very little state control in tourism. The top-down, approach, with a strong private-public partnership, is their solution to the issue of growth in tourism. Liberals are divided between non-structural economists and structural economists. The former urge the grassroots approach while the latter favor broad-based reforms to create a better distribution of wealth. The more radical Marxist approach, which favors class struggle as a method to redistribute wealth and power, sees in international tourism the seeds of neocolonialism. It advocated social tourism or state subsidy for access to tourism for the mass of people. However, the Marxian approach is also undergoing changes. The development of tourism in China for economic gains, in Cuba for image promotion and economic benefits, and the emergence of Kerala under a Marxist government as leading tourism state in India are examples in this regard. Within the concept of sustainability, Kerry B. Godfrey, Towards Sustainability, in Harrison and Husbands, ed. Practicing Responsible Tourism, New York, 1996, has mentioned two schools of thought. 1. The product approach. In this approach, sustainability is regarded as an alternative to or replacement of conventional mass tourism by developing new green products. 2. The industry approach, considering that mass tourism is inevitable because of the tourist demand. The requirement is to make all forms of tourism more sustainable. The industry approach endorses the product approach's positive qualities but believes that it cannot replace mass tourism, and as Cohen puts it, the aim should be to help to reform the tourist establishment and mass tourism from within. 1989. In fact, no single approach is viable to meet the challenge of sustainability. The issue is further complexed because of the diversity in fragility, durability, and other natural features of the tourism regions, areas, or sites which are targeted for sustainable development. 1.5 Views of WTO. The World Tourism Organization has been championing the cause of sustainable tourism development. It has incorporated in the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism sustainable tourism as Article 3. You will read about this code in the last unit. It has published the following books on this theme: Times Sustainable Tourism Development, Guide for Local Planners, Times What Tourism Managers Need to Know, Indicators of Sustainable Tourism, and Times Sustainable Development of Tourism, a compilation of good practices. Besides these, its publication on national and regional tourism planning mentions that one of the important benefits of tourism is that, if it is properly developed based on the concept of sustainability, tourism can greatly help justify and pay for conservation of an area's natural and cultural resources. Thus, tourism can be an important means of achieving conservation in areas that otherwise have limited capability to accomplish environmental protection and conservation objectives. For achieving sustainable development, it lays stress on three aspects: 1. An environmental planning approach, 2. Community-based tourism, and 3. Concept of quality tourism. The first takes into account all elements of environment before going for development, the second focuses on community involvement in planning, and the third refers to tourist attractions, facilities, and services that offer good value for money, protect tourism resources, and attract the kinds of tourists who would respect the local environment and society. The principles of sustainable tourism as defined by the WTO in 1988 are envisaged as leading to management of all resources in such a way that economic, social, and aesthetic needs can be fulfilled while maintaining cultural integrity, essential ecological processes, biological diversity, and life support systems. These principles should be adopted for all forms of tourism. They should be adopted by all tourism operations, establishments, and projects, including conventional tourism and the alternative forms that have emerged as an attempt to share the costs of mass tourism around the world. The WTO also provides consultancy on the issue of sustainability. Many other international organizations have also come out with their own codes in this regard. 1.6 Roles and responsibilities. Ignorance, politics, and economics seems to work contrary to the attainment of the goal of sustainable development as far as tourism is concerned, wrote Richard W. Butler, pre- and post-impact assessment of tourism development in Piers and Butler, ed. Tourism Research, London 1993. As a result of the deterioration of tourism attractions and resources, it is tourism itself which suffers heavily. The victims are the host communities, for the tourist will move to another, unspoiled destination, only to spoil it. It is the local industry that will suffer as the big players will also move out and do business elsewhere. At many destinations, even the host communities, in order to make quick money, overuse or throw open their resources and environment to be exploited by the visitors, businesses, or local vested interests. It is time for them to realize that this is a suicidal path for the destination. In order to move towards the path of sustainability or to achieve sustainable development, every player in tourism has a role which is loaded with heavy responsibilities. Middleton mentions 5 good reasons for collective action by the multiple players in tourism on the environmental issues. Sustainable tourism, 1998. 1. Size and growth potential. 2. Prosperity. 3. Global reach. 4. Market demand. And 5. Competitive business advantage. All these 5 aspects are interlinked. For example, the size and growth potential will depend on the quality of environment of tourism areas, and a sense of growing responsibility has to be conveyed to all in this regard. The physical environment and diverse cultures as the core resources for tourism not only need to be collectively protected for their intrinsic values but also need to be treated by the industry in practice in the same way as commercial assets, needing continuous maintenance, refurbishment, and investment. On this, according to Middleton, will rest the future commercial prosperity. Tourism is a global activity, and the industry has the option either to be in the vanguard of change and influence and control events, or ignore the process of environmental change. However, if they opt for the second, they alone will be the sufferers, as the initiative and control will pass on to regulators and anti-tourism lobbies. Middleton points out that there are clear indicators that the market demand is for such tourism products which offer clean air, clean beaches and bathing water, pristine mountain slopes, and uncongested, crime and pollution-free destinations. One can add to this many other attributes like authenticity of crafts, customs, i.e., cultural aspects, the demands of green tourists, etc. Hence, ignoring these aspects of market demand in product design, marketing strategies, and business operations will be a self-defeating exercise for the tourism industry. Those in the industry who contribute towards sustainable practices and development will have a competitive business advantage. A realization to this effect is already there, and various tourism industry associations are making their members aware and adopting codes of conduct in this regard. Here one must remember that the NGOs are playing a vital role, often through struggles also, in influencing the attitudes of the industry as well as the people in the destination areas. The NGOs have also brought to fore the necessity of changing the behavior and attitudes of the consumers of tourism products. In a submission to the UN Commission on Sustainable Development, the Ecumenical Coalition on Third World Tourism, April 1999, stressed on influencing consumer behavior towards sustainable tourism. See http://www.isen.org/thorbhav.htm from a sustainability perspective, feeding tourist fantasies and demands for familiarity and comfort is a costly business. In the typical destination area, the natural ecosystem is leveled, paved, and then landscaped with lawns and a handful or two of nursery-grown tree and flower species, landmarks and neighborhoods central to the local community's sense of place are replaced by cookie-cutter hotel and recreation developments. Scarce water is diverted for swimming pools and tourists' long, hot showers. Ecological thresholds are routinely crossed, and in many southern destinations, international human rights standards are daily violated. Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to market-driven tourism, losing their customary lands and resources, religious freedom, and ultimately their cultures and capacity for self-sufficiency. Women and children are also at high risk, where tourism economies are built upon exploitative labor practices and where sex tourism occurs. The average consumer resists acknowledging this dark side of tourism. The apathy stems largely from our northern worldview, which promotes individualism, with purchasing power the measure of success. However, it is also reinforced by our consumer-savvy business and political systems. Both, together with the media, deliver abbreviated interpretations of global crisis, alleviating any direct sense of complicity. Consequently, there is little impetus for consumers to address in any meaningful way the exponential costs of tourism, like climate change or the loss of biological and cultural diversity. In the North, most consumers are ignorant of the connectedness between ecosystems and human activities and related issues like equity. We live in a monetary society, often removed and detached from the places and people that sustain us. Tourism, involving a highly buffered and short-term experience of other locales, tends to reinforce this insular perspective. As tourists, we can play and then leave, remaining isolated from any negative impacts at the local level. We can suspend common sense and codes of conduct without being accountable for what is damaged or who is hurt. Hence, it is necessary to make the consumer of tourism products aware of sustainable practices. No doubt a new consumer has started emerging with a different market demand as mentioned earlier. While consuming tourism resources, this consumer is concerned with the issue of sustainability. But it is still a Herculean task to make every tourism consumer, business and service provider contribute towards sustainable tourism development. The responsibilities in this regard lie with one and all, i.e., government, industry, tourists, and locals. Middleton mentions two major dimensions in this regard: times improving sustainable practice at the destination chosen by visitors, and times the way the businesses within the travel and tourism industry conduct their development and operational decisions. We can add to these the commitment of the government, the local bodies and people to sustainable development. A commitment that should be demonstrated through practice and not by conferences or on paper alone. At the same time, the workers and trade unions also have a responsibility in this regard. The International Confederation Free Trade Union and Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD's background paper for the Commission on Sustainable Development, April 1999, stated that trade unions are well placed to play a role in making sustainable tourism a reality. Tourism workers have the potential of becoming active agents of change amongst the tourists they are paid to serve. However, it can only be achieved with the cooperation of employers, governments, and NGOs. An important tool for monitoring the sustainability criteria is impact assessment of tourism. However, scholars like Richard W. Butler have gone a step further to advocate even post-impact assessment. Pearce and Butler, Tourism Research, 1993, of Tourism Projects, 1.7 Summary, Sustainable development can be regarded as a philosophy. It has received support because it reflects the growing popular understanding and awareness of the scientific investigation of our socio-political and environmental reality that should be the basis of our economic and leisure activity in the future. It looks at the needs of the world's poor and the limitations which nature has to impose on the consumption of the world's rich. It offers an opportunity for action at all levels, which will give rise to new ways of doing things. However, it also gives legitimacy to market capitalism and the trickle down economy because it aims to reform the Western capitalist form of consumption and production, and not to change it. One has to keep both sustainable tourism and sustainable tourism development in view while planning for tourism. Similarly, these concepts have to be practiced in business operations also, along with making the consumers aware of their significance. Though each player in tourism has a role in this regard, it is the NGOs who have come forward to play the role of watchmen. It is expected that as professional managers you would be able to apply the various aspects discussed in this unit in your day-to-day operations. The views of Mid-Delton discussed in the unit are extremely relevant for the tourism industry. A gathering of 64 nations at Manila in 1997 undertook to be more responsible with the phenomenal growth of tourism. Drug abuse, sex tour, child exploitation, crime and environmental degradation were among the social costs of tourism that were addressed by them. Legal regimes should be put in place to curb and to eliminate problems that are serious enough to threaten social cohesion and the ecological equilibrium of the communities visited by tourists. Since tourism is a form of consumption and therefore a product of economic development, it is clear that a balance has to be created so that the benefits will flow to all countries rather than the social costs of the evils of tourism being borne by the poor, the small and the less developed countries. With millions of tourists estimated to be on the move in the year 2000 and earnings estimated at $621 billions, the challenge before us to control mass tourism in the interests of the resident communities and service providers so that they are not left to pick up the ills of tourism after the tourists have gone home. However, we must remember that the debate for sustainable tourism development is an ongoing debate and everyone has a stake in it. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates and we will see you with the next chapter.